the thing that drew me to Dark Spring really was these final pages where she, in detail, you know, after describing all these beautiful objects that she possesses and sort of worships and covets, she goes through this meticulous description of these objects, and then she goes through a meticulous description of her own romanticized, imagined, fantasized suicide, in which it's very aestheticized. It's very much, it's like she's seeing it in a film. She puts on her most beautiful nightgown, what her beautiful body will look like laying in the grass. Incredibly strong visual reference that this girl clearly has, the character in her story. And I just find it really interesting that she pairs it with the description of objects to the description of herself. She walks through this imaginary suicide, and then she enacts it. And the actual enacting of it is very harsh. It's very almost grotesque. I mean, it's amazing that it ends with the image of a dog licking her between her legs. There's often this, you know, hyper aestheticization with this underlying like brutality of the reality of the situation. So the young girl in the book creates an image of what she creates this image for herself, and then in order to achieve the image, she has to completely sacrifice everything else. It's very purposeful. It opens with the male narration, and it's in my mind, I was like, I want the voice of like a National Geographic documentary that is telling me about the world, like planet Earth, this, you know, some voice from above, kind of the voice of God telling me, you know, this is how it is. And then he describes up to the point that she goes into her teepee with her objects. And at that point, a little girl's voice comes in, and we're seeing everything is shot from a first person point of view outside, and then we go inside, you know, and then we're in the tent, and it's her voice. So in a way, it's like she has some control over the authorship. The text layer, which we assume is my voice as the artist, you know, I'm talking about my childhood experiences, and I'm talking about very specifically like writing about my first sexual encounters, writing about them in my diary in the third person, you know, so doing exactly what this little girl in the book is doing, of projecting some image. So again, like, you know, my first sexual experiences, supposedly according to the text, I'm like missing the actual experience because I'm so busy seeing myself like I'm in a movie, writing out this romantic version of it in the third person in my diary. You know, and then I go directly from the sexual experiences and masturbation to my first suicide attempt, supposedly. You know, we have the male gaze via the voice of the narrator who tells us what's happening. And then the girl sort of seizes control of it in a way when she goes inside. And so there's suddenly this, to me, it's like a power struggle where now she's taking over her own story, and she's having some sort of like real authorship of describing her experiences in that scene. Like that is, you know, and it comes with this beautiful romantic music. And in that moment though, it very quickly slips into, we see shots of the book, and you suddenly realize, oh, this is not some autonomous, you know, internal, she doesn't have authorship because she's reading a script essentially. So she's reading something that's already been given to her that she's taken on to think is her. So she's fighting this male, you know, the overt male gaze, and then she's also fighting these, you know, things that have felt more intimate or, you know, less overt that she's sort of internalized. But so it's like no matter where she goes, she has no real ownership of anything. She has no chance for any sort of original experience. Dark Spring is, we don't have the time to go into it, but a lot of it is also about the, you know, the structure of language and how language does a disservice the same way that images do. And so there's like this audio track narration, which is having this duality, this mirroring happening. And then there's a third So there's Zern, there's the girl, there's the male character, and then there's me as the artist giving information that may or may not be it's probably going to be assumed to be autobiographical because I'm speaking in the first person, and these like sort of diaristic, confessions of my own adolescence, I think, and also playing on the viewer or the reader's obsession with narrative truth and feeling tricked or knowing like, well, is this true or is it fiction? And to me, when I think about the way my truth has unfolded in my life, it is a fiction. It's created, it's structured, it's coming from all these different places, and it changes over time. But this obsession with trying to nail down like, well, is this autobiographical? I think actually my first interaction with Carl Dreyer's film was in Godard's film Vivre sa vie, where we see her in the theater watching the film with Maria Falconetti, and she's crying. So my first experience of the film was through another female fictional character's experience of being moved to tears by this image of female suffering. And that video just started out as just wanting to make a piece that just sort of explored my relationship to the image of Maria Falconetti suffering on screen as Joan of Arc. So it's her enactment. Okay, well, I want to investigate this film. What's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to try to, like I do with so much of my other work, I'm going to try to like reshoot this film. I'm going to try to achieve something of this image. I'm going to try to achieve this image through the surface. So the first thing I had to do was to shave my head. So I set up my camera and I shaved my head in front of the camera. And then I sort of try to position myself to really try to like just mirror as if I'm trying to channel something. So that was the first part of making that video. And then the video just turned into sort of this, it was the first time I ever used voiceover, and it turned into this sort of like narrative about my relationship with the film and with the images and trying to achieve them. So Maria Falconetti, when they filmed Joan of Arc, she had a somewhat of a breakdown. It was really hard for her, and it was really hard for her to shave her head. Then I went into it thinking, oh, I'm just going to shave my head and do this thing. And I woke up the next day and I walked out into the world, and I thought that I had so much self-knowledge, and because I was looking at this so critically, it didn't occur to me that someone who's had long blonde hair their whole life, suddenly to have no hair, like that it would actually really shake me. So I became really obsessed with the video Joan of Arc being all about, trying to achieve this image, again, at the cost of my own real experience, by trying to like evacuate myself for someone else's experience, which always leaves you with nothing. And then I had this pile of hair, which was like this like just big mound of the real sitting there in my studio. I have to make something of this. I started thinking about hair, and I started thinking about Rapunzel and fairy tales. To put them side by side, the video Joan of Arc is very much about, it's like you have the image side of it, and then you have the real side of it. And then also, of course, this fairy tale element that you're told as a young child, and for me as a young girl, these morality tales, these tales that are just stories, but they're meant to really tell you, you need to behave in the world like this, or else this will happen to you. They're designed to train you to behave properly within a given culture. The problem is any sort of gaze, anything that leads to self-objectification, anything that makes it harder to like embody your own body.